pay me until the $500 was paid back. So it was a time when we returning veterans were treated very, very well. And of course, a lot of people got married because marriages had been delayed because of the war. I was an older student because I had been out of the college for 2 years, so I was 2 years behind in age. Veterans were very much respected, and in general it was a time of prosperity. There was a period of time after the war when there was unemployment again, not as bad as during the Depression, because factories and industries were changing over from making tanks to making cars. So they had to retool. So they shut down the factory for a while, and only certain skilled people were in the factory changing the machinery around. Then the factory would open up again, and everybody went in to work again. But 5220 Club, if your factory closed down because it was retooling, you were a factory worker, you were on the 5220 Club for that period of time.
And by the way, about car, have you ever hear or have you seen in the United States Studebakers or wheels?
In those days there were Studebakers, but Studebaker was a minor company which went out of business. It could not compete with the three big ones. That's Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler.
And have you ever seen, for example, Willys on the street of New York?
Excuse me?
Willys, how is it? Willys, it's car that was on Lend-Lease in Russia. Russia knew Willys is the American car.
Oh, we had a thing we called the Jeep, which may have been what you meant. It was a small car. The ride was rough. It was not made for comfort, but it was made for endurance. And you could they had a hood you could put up if it rained or snowed. Yes, we saw the Willys, W-I-L-L-Y-S. I didn't understand when you said it. It sounded to me like Witties, Willys. We did see them until the car manufacturers got back into production. It was very short that they were commonly used. I left out something. Before the war, we were very, very poor, extremely poor. During the Depression, my family lived on $10 a week, 4 of us. That was the minimum wage, 25 cents an hour. And we lived in bad housing, poorly heated, with rats, and so on. During the Depression in the United States, very few people went hungry. There was food, but getting clothing for yourself and your children was very, very hard. Finding good housing was very hard. You couldn't afford it. You had to live in bad housing. Now, during the war, people made a lot of money. Those who stayed here and worked in factories made a lot of money. But there was nothing to buy. Cars were not available because the factories were making tanks and airplanes. So people bought war bonds. In other words, you would loan the government the money that you couldn't spend by buying a war bond for $10 or $50 or $100, and you could have a deduction made from your pay, and the money was saved up, and then you got a bond. After the war, people had all of these bonds, and now that you could buy a car, they started cashing in their bonds. The bond said, show the bond to a government official, to a federal government official, and certain official. He will give you the value of the bond. If you have $1,000 bond that you bought with your savings from your work during the war, it's a loan to the government. The government is going to repay the money by giving you back the $1,000. Plus you got interest on the bond during the time that the government had your money. You know, a loan, you get interest. The person who gives you the loan gets interest. So people had a lot of money to spend. Now, what did they do? They moved out of and jobs were now plentiful because we were out of the Depression. They moved out of the poor housing into middle-class housing, into apartment houses, what was middle-class housing in those days, into middle-class housing. They could buy clothing now, they could buy toasters, they could even buy washing machines, dishwashing machines, refrigerators. Most people now had their clothing washed by a washing machine, either in a store that had that. My mother used to, and during the Depression, she had a washboard, and she had a deep sink. She put the washboard on the sink, and she would wash the clothing this way, and then she would hang it out on a line which went from our kitchen window to the neighbor's kitchen window across the way. And of course the neighbor would be hanging out the laundry, and the two women would call out to each other, and they would talk to each other that way. What's happening in your family, what's happening, so on, and so on. But that was life during the 30s. Life after the war, the late 40s and the 50s, was a very prosperous time, was a happy time in this country. Another thing, union membership in this country went to 70% of the working force. And unions were very much respected and very much liked. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, is called Ike Eisenhower, was a Republican, conservative Republican, conservative for those days, got elected United States President on the Republican ticket, and made speeches where he said he was in favor of unions, in favor of collective bargaining, that he wanted to bring collective bargaining to Germany, unions and so on to Germany. The country was so different in those days. And this lasted until sometime in the 60s.